The Harvest Moon Incident. The emergency session of the Galactic Medical Council convened under circumstances that nobody had anticipated. The vast chamber, carved from a single crystalline asteroid and floating in neutral space, hummed with anxious energy. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sectors, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and telepathic waves that the universal translators worked overtime to process. Ambassador Krell of the Jarian Collective stood at the central podium, his 6 limbs trembling despite his efforts to maintain diplomatic composure. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their stoic nature and emotional control, which made his current state all the more alarming to those gathered. The silver scales that covered his elongated body had lost their usual luster, appearing dull and lifeless under the chamber's soft lighting. "Honorable members of the Council," Krell began, his voice carrying the weight of desperation that transcended species barriers. "I come before you not as an ambassador, but as a father, a brother, and a representative of 3 billion souls who face extinction within the next standard cycle." A ripple of concern moved through the assembly. The Jarian Collective was one of the oldest civilizations in the known galaxy, their culture dating back nearly 10,000 years. To hear them speak of extinction seemed impossible. Yet the data streaming across the holographic displays told a story that could not be denied. The plague had appeared without warning on Viridian 7, the agricultural heart of the Jarian colony worlds. What started as a simple respiratory infection had mutated into something far more sinister within weeks. The pathogen attacked the nervous system with frightening efficiency, causing paralysis, organ failure, and death within days of the first symptoms appearing. Jarian medical science, advanced as it was, had proven utterly helpless against this microscopic enemy. Krell continued his address, his translator struggling to convey the emotional depth of his words. "We have exhausted every option available to us. Our finest medical minds have worked without rest. We have consulted with the Vorian healers, the Palaxian bioengineers, even the enigmatic collectors who guard the ancient medical archives. Nothing has worked. The plague spreads faster than we can study it, and our people die faster than we can count them." The council chamber fell into a heavy silence. Every species present understood what Krell was about to propose, and many were already shaking their heads or signaling their disapproval through their various means of expression. The Turthan delegate, a being composed of sentient gas contained within a specialized suit, spoke first. "Ambassador Krell, surely you are not suggesting what I think you are suggesting. The humans? The newcomers who have barely been part of the galactic community for 20 standard years? The species that still uses chemical propulsion for half their vessels?" Krell's response was immediate and sharp. "The same species that solved the Korthax virus in 6 months when our best estimates gave us 10 years. The same species that developed a cure for Nebulin's disease that had plagued the Andorian sector for centuries. The same species whose medical innovations have been described as both brilliant and terrifying in equal measure." Another delegate rose, this one from the Chitauri Ascendancy, a species that prided itself on technological superiority. "Their methods are crude, Ambassador. They experiment on their own people. They push boundaries that civilized species abandoned millennia ago. Yes, they achieve results, but at what cost?" "At any cost," Krell replied, his voice now firm with conviction. "Because that is precisely what we need. We need a species that does not accept defeat. We need minds that think differently, that approach problems from angles we cannot perceive. We need the humans, because they are the only ones crazy enough to try the impossible and stubborn enough to succeed." The debate that followed lasted 3 standard hours. Arguments were made about ethics, about the proper conduct of medical research, about the dangers of involving such an unpredictable species in matters of such importance. But in the end, the numbers spoke louder than philosophical concerns. 3 billion lives hung in the balance, and the Galactic Medical Council authorized contact with Earth's medical authorities. Dr. Sarah Chen received the message while she was finishing a 30-hour shift at the Houston Center for Xenobiological Medicine. At 42 years old, she had already made a name for herself in the emerging field of interspecies medicine. Her specialty was rapid response pathogen analysis, and her track record was impressive even by human standards. She had been the lead researcher on 3 major breakthrough treatments for alien diseases, and her unorthodox methods had saved countless lives across multiple species. When the communication from the Galactic Medical Council appeared on her screen, Sarah was too exhausted to feel the appropriate level of excitement. She read through the brief twice, her tired mind slowly processing the scope of what was being asked. A complete unknown pathogen, billions at risk. Time frame measured in weeks, not months. She made 3 calls. The first was to her team, scattered across the globe but always ready for deployment. The second was to her daughter, to cancel yet another promised weekend visit. The third was to her ex-husband, to apologize for the cancellation and to hear him sigh in that familiar way that reminded her why they were divorced. 72 hours later, Sarah and her team of 12 specialists arrived at Viridian 7 aboard a human medical transport. The ship was functional rather than elegant, packed with equipment that made the Jarian receiving officials nervous. Portable biocontainment units, experimental nanomedicine fabricators, and what appeared to be enough chemical compounds to create a small pharmacy. The Jarian medical facility that had been prepared for them was state-of-the-art by galactic standards, but Sarah immediately began making modifications. Walls were torn out to create better airflow. Equipment was rearranged to improve efficiency. Work schedules were thrown out in favor of what her second-in-command, Dr. James Rodriguez, called organized chaos. Ambassador Krell watched the humans work with a mixture of fascination and horror. They moved with purpose but without the careful deliberation that characterized Jarian medical practice. They argued loudly with each other, challenging ideas and proposing alternatives without concern for hierarchy or protocol. They consumed alarming amounts of caffeine and worked in shifts that seemed designed to violate every principle of worker safety. But they also got results. Within 18 hours of arrival, Sarah's team had completed a comprehensive analysis of the pathogen. Within 36 hours, they had identified 3 potential treatment vectors. Within 60 hours, they had synthesized the first batch of what Sarah called adaptive nanomedicine. The treatment was unlike anything the Jarians had seen before. Microscopic machines programmed with human-designed algorithms that would enter the patient's bloodstream and hunt down the plague pathogen. The nanomachines would adapt in real time to the virus's mutations, learning and evolving faster than the disease could spread. It was brilliant. It was revolutionary. It was also completely untested on Jarian physiology. Krell stood in the observation room as the first patient received the treatment. A young Jarian female, barely into her reproductive cycle, lay on the medical platform. Her breathing was labored, her scales had turned gray, and the monitors showed her nervous system shutting down. She had hours left at best. Sarah Chen stood beside the platform, her own exhaustion evident in every movement. Her hands trembled slightly as she activated the injection system. "This is going to work," she said, though Krell could not tell if she was trying to convince him or herself. The nanomachines entered the patient's bloodstream, and for 10 agonizing minutes nothing happened. Then the monitors began to change. Neural activity stabilized. Respiratory function improved. The gray tint in the scales began to fade, replaced by healthy silver. Within an hour, the patient was conscious. Within 6 hours, she was sitting up and asking for food. Within 12 hours, she was demanding to be released so she could return to her family. The success was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's team began producing the treatment in massive quantities, working around the clock to meet the desperate demand. But Krell began to notice something that troubled him deeply. The humans were not resting. They worked in continuous shifts, but those shifts were blurring together. He watched as Dr. Chen went 48 hours without sleep, sustained only by stimulants and sheer willpower. He saw Dr. Rodriguez collapse at his workstation and be revived with injections before returning to work 30 minutes later. By the end of the 3rd day, tens of thousands of Jarians had been treated. The plague was being beaten back. Lives were being saved. But the humans were paying a price that made Krell's stomach twist. They were literally working themselves to death to save his people. On the morning of the 4th day, Krell found Sarah in the fabrication lab, her eyes bloodshot and her hands shaking as she calibrated another batch of nanomachines. "Dr. Chen," he said gently, "you need to rest. Your people need to rest. We can find others to continue the work." Sarah looked at him with eyes that held determination and exhaustion in equal measure. "We rest when the job is done, Ambassador. That's how we do things. That's the human way, but at what cost?" Krell asked, echoing the question that had been asked in the council chamber days earlier. Sarah smiled. though it did not reach her tired eyes. At whatever cost is necessary, because those are your people out there dying, because we have the ability to help, because if we stop now even for a moment, someone who could have been saved will die instead. Can you understand that? Can you understand that we cannot rest while others suffer? Krell understood, and that understanding filled him with a profound sadness. The humans were saving his species, but they were destroying themselves to do it. This was the human price, and they paid it willingly, without hesitation, without complaint. By the end of the 7th day, the plague was under control. 93% of infected Jurians had been successfully treated. The crisis was over. Viridian 7 was saved. But in the medical facility, 3 human doctors had collapsed from exhaustion and were now patients themselves. And every member of Sarah's team showed signs of severe physical and mental strain. Ambassador Krell stood before the human team as they prepared to depart, his ceremonial robes newly restored to their full glory as befitted a representative of a grateful people. Dr. Chen, your species has performed a miracle here. You have saved us when we could not save ourselves. But I must ask, is this always the price? Do humans always sacrifice themselves so completely? Sarah, now rested enough to think clearly, considered the question carefully. Not always, Ambassador. But when it matters, when lives are on the line, when we have the ability to make a difference, yes, we pay the price. We carry the weight. Because that is what it means to be human. Our triumphs always come with human costs, and we accept that burden willingly. As the human medical transport departed Viridian 7, Krell watched it disappear into the stars and wondered if the galaxy truly understood what it meant to have humanity as allies. They had witnessed human performance, and now they were beginning to understand the human price. The question that haunted him was whether that price was one that should ever be asked of anyone, human or otherwise. The weight of victory. 3 months had passed since the Viridian 7 crisis, and the galaxy had not forgotten what the humans had accomplished. Dr. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Galactic Medical Council headquarters, staring out at the swirling nebula that painted the darkness with colors that had no names in human language. In her hand she held a medal made from crystallized starlight, an honor bestowed by a grateful Jarian collective. It was beautiful, priceless, and utterly meaningless to her at this moment. Behind her, the ceremony continued. Speeches were being made, praising human ingenuity and courage. Representatives from dozens of species had traveled across the galaxy to witness this moment, to see the heroes who had saved billions. But Sarah felt no sense of heroism, only a hollow exhaustion that no amount of rest seemed to cure. Dr. James Rodriguez found her there, his own medal hanging awkwardly around his neck. At 37, he looked a decade older than he had before Viridian 7. New lines had carved themselves around his eyes, and his hands still trembled slightly when he thought no one was watching. You should be in there, he said quietly. They are celebrating you. They are celebrating a myth, Sarah replied without turning. They see heroes who performed miracles. They do not see the nightmares, the flashbacks, the medication we need just to sleep at night. They do not see Dr. Patel, who still has not fully recovered from his collapse. They do not see the price we actually paid. James stood beside her, his own gaze lost in the cosmic display before them. Do you regret it? What we did? Sarah was silent for a long moment. No, I would do it again. That is what terrifies me most. I would pay that price again, knowing what it costs. What does that make us, James? What kind of people willingly break themselves for strangers? Before James could answer, an urgent communication interrupted the ceremony. The holographic display materialized between them, showing the face of Admiral Thex, a military commander from the Orlathian Federation. His species resembled terrestrial octopi, though significantly larger and adapted for life in methane atmospheres. His translator carried a tone of desperate urgency. Dr. Chen, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation. Mining Station Epsilon 9 in the Tartarus Belt. A new outbreak. Different pathogen, same rate of lethality. 40,000 workers, multiple species. We need your team. We need you now. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She looked at James and saw her own horror reflected in his eyes. Not again. Not so soon. Her team was still recovering, still healing from wounds that were not visible on medical scans. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was on psychiatric leave. Dr. Marcus Webb had resigned entirely, unable to face another crisis. 3 others were still undergoing treatment for stress-related complications. Admiral, Sarah began, her voice carefully controlled. My team is not ready for another deployment. We need time to recover, to rebuild our strength. Surely there are other medical teams available. Admiral Thex's tentacles writhed in what the translator interpreted as distress. Dr. Chen, you do not understand. We have already consulted with 6 different species medical authorities. The pathogen is adapting faster than anything we have seen before. It has characteristics similar to the Viridian plague, but with mutations that render conventional treatments useless. Projections indicate total facility loss within 11 days. We need human innovation. We need your team specifically. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words crushing down upon her. 40,000 lives, 11 days. Her exhausted team that still bore the scars from their last mission. The choice should have been impossible, but she already knew what she would decide. That knowledge made her want to scream. Give us 6 hours to assemble, she said finally. We will be there. The communication ended and James immediately grabbed her arm. Sarah, no. We cannot do this again. The team is not ready. You are not ready. This will break us. Then we break, Sarah said, her voice hard. What is the alternative, James? We say no and 40,000 people die because we were too tired? We let them die because saving them would be inconvenient for us? It is not about inconvenience, James shouted, his composure finally cracking. It is about survival. Our survival. Sarah, if we keep doing this, if we keep paying this price, eventually there will be nothing left of us. We will have saved the galaxy and destroyed ourselves in the process. Sarah turned to face him fully, and he could see tears streaming down her face even as her jaw remained set with determination. I know, God help me, I know. But I also know that I cannot be the person who chooses her own well-being over the lives of 40,000 people. That is not who I am. That is not who we are. The day I can make that choice easily is the day I stop being human. The reassembly of the team was painful. Sarah made the calls herself, watching faces on screens as doctors who had barely begun to heal processed what was being asked of them. Some said yes immediately. Others needed time. Dr. Chen gave them honesty instead of inspiration. She told them about the nightmares that would not stop. She told them about the physical toll that would accumulate. She told them that this mission might be the one that finally broke them beyond repair. 9 of the original 12 agreed to go. It was not enough, but it would have to be. Mining Station Epsilon 9 was a massive orbital platform that processed rare minerals from the asteroid belt. It was home to 40,000 workers from 17 different species, all living in close quarters that made disease containment nearly impossible. By the time Sarah's team arrived, the death toll had already reached 300. The pathogen was indeed unlike anything they had encountered before. It seemed to target the unique biology of each species differently, adapting its attack vector based on the host's physiology. What killed a Vorian in hours would incubate in an Orlathian for days before striking. It was as if the disease was learning, evolving with each new victim. Sarah established their base of operations in the station's medical bay, but this time something was different. Ambassador Krell had also arrived, along with teams of Zarian medical specialists. Representatives from other species that had benefited from human medical interventions came as well, not to watch, but to work. Krell approached Sarah as she was setting up the nanomedicine fabricators. Dr. Chen, my people wish to assist. We have studied your methods from Viridian 7. We have trained in your techniques. Please allow us to share the burden. Sarah looked at him with surprise.
Ambassador, this is not your responsibility.
You do not need to endanger your people. Krell's scales rippled with an emotion that the translator struggled to interpret. When my people were dying, you did not hesitate. You did not calculate the cost to yourselves. You simply acted. Now I understand that this is not sustainable. No species, not even humans, can carry such weight alone. If we are to truly be allies, we must learn to share both the triumphs and the prices. What followed was unprecedented in galactic medical history. Human doctors worked alongside Zarian specialists, Orlathian researchers, and Palaxian bioengineers. Sarah's team provided the innovative thinking and willingness to take risks, but now they were supported by dozens of alien medical professionals who had studied human methods and were prepared to push their own boundaries. The work was still grueling. The hours were still endless. But for the first time, Sarah felt something she had not experienced during Viridian 7. She was not alone in bearing the weight. Dr. Rodriguez worked with a Zarian researcher named Thalax, teaching him the principles behind adaptive nanomedicine. Together, they developed a variation that could adjust to multiple species simultaneously. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had returned despite her psychiatric leave, collaborated with an Orlathian biochemist to create rapid diagnostic protocols that cut analysis time in half. Sarah herself worked with Ambassador Krell, and in the long hours of the night cycle, they talked. She told him about the nightmares, about watching people die despite her best efforts, about the guilt of wondering if she could have worked harder, moved faster, been better. Krell listened and shared his own experiences of loss and burden, and Sarah realized that suffering was not uniquely human after all. On the 6th day, they achieved a breakthrough, a multi-species treatment protocol that could be adapted in real time for different physiologies. It was not perfect, but it was effective. The death toll stopped climbing. The infected began to recover. The station was saved, but the cost had still been paid. 2 human doctors required medical evacuation. Several alien medical workers collapsed from exhaustion. Everyone bore scars, physical or psychological, that would take time to heal. Yet this time the burden had been shared, the weight had been distributed. In the aftermath, as the medical teams prepared to depart, Admiral Thex called an assembly of all participating species. The mining station's main plaza had been converted into a memorial space, with holographic displays showing the names of those who had died and those who had sacrificed to save others. "What we witnessed here," the Admiral said, his translated words carrying across the assembled crowd, "was not just human performance. It was the beginning of a new approach to crisis response. The humans taught us that sometimes to save lives we must be willing to pay prices that seem unreasonable, but they also learned, I hope, that they do not have to pay those prices alone." Sarah stood with her team, and for the first time since Viridian 7, she felt something that resembled peace. The nightmares would still come. The physical toll would still need to be addressed, but the crushing isolation of bearing the weight alone had been lifted. Ambassador Krell approached her after the ceremony, holding a data tablet. "Dr. Chen, the Galactic Medical Council has approved a new initiative. We are calling it the Shared Burden Protocol. Medical teams from multiple species, trained in rapid response techniques prepared to deploy together for future crises. The humans will lead the training, but all species will contribute personnel and resources." Sarah took the tablet and read through the proposal. It was ambitious, perhaps even idealistic, but it represented something profound. The galaxy had witnessed human triumph and human cost, and instead of simply accepting that price, they were choosing to share it. "This could change everything," Sarah said quietly. "If species work together, support each other, the burden becomes manageable. Lives can still be saved, but the cost can be distributed." "That is the hope," Krell agreed. "You humans showed us what is possible when you refused to accept defeat. Now we must show you that you do not have to break yourselves to achieve the impossible. That is what true alliance means." As Sarah's transport departed Epsilon 9, she sat with her team in the common area. They were exhausted, traumatized, and forever changed by what they had experienced. But they were also alive, recovering, and no longer alone in their burden. Dr. Rodriguez raised a cup of coffee in a tired salute. "To human performances and human prices. May we keep delivering the first while learning to reduce the second." Sarah raised her own cup, a small smile on her face. "And to the allies who are willing to share the weight. Because that is how we will survive this. Together." The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Human triumphs did indeed come with human costs, but those costs did not have to be borne alone. In sharing the burden, multiple species found something more valuable than medical breakthroughs or saved lives. They found true partnership, built not on convenience or mutual benefit, but on the willingness to sacrifice together, to carry the weight as one. The scars would remain. The nightmares would persist. But Sarah Chen and her team had proven something that would echo across the stars for generations to come. Humans would always be willing to pay the price to save lives. And now, finally, they had allies willing to stand beside them and share that burden. The weight of victory was still heavy, but it was no longer unbearable. And in that truth lay hope for both humanity and the galaxy they had chosen to protect.